This is absolutely wild. You feel every little bump in the road, every rock that hits the car, you hear the gasoline smell throughout the cabin. Oh my God. This is fantastic. That sound. Oh my God, I love this thing. Next to me is the Ford GT40, one of the most legendary race cars of all time. Standing just 40 inches tall, it's as breathtaking to look at as it is fast. The story originates back in the early 1960s when Henry Ford II decided he wanted to involve Ford with competitive racing. In early 1963, Henry Ford actually attempted to purchase Ferrari. Unfortunately, after months of negotiation, at the last second, Enzo Ferrari backed out of the deal, leaving Henry Ford II furious. In a famous quote to Don Frey, Henry Ford said, "You go to Le Mans and beat his ass." And the rest was simply history. Ford's chief engineer at the time, Roy Lunn, conceptualized a mid-engine V8-powered two-seater race car. To speed up production, they actually teamed up with Lola. Unfortunately, in 1964, Ford's performance wasn't all that great, and eventually they ended up giving up the GT program to the control of Carroll Shelby. Out went the old small block 4.2-liter V8, and in came a 7-liter 427 from the Cobra. In 1965, Le Mans was yet again a disaster for the Ford GT40s, with all 5 cars racing not ending up finishing. But in 1966, everything changed. In 1966, Ford ended up finishing first, second, and third at the 24-hour of Le Mans race, dominating Ferrari finally. In fact, the cars were so fast that towards the end of the race, the drivers were told to slow their cars down. They ended up finishing 47 laps ahead of Ferrari. In 1967, Ford won again with the Mark IV GT40. In 1968, the Ford GT40 wins again after John Wyer's team secured a sponsorship from Gulf Oil, resulting in one of the most legendary liveries of all time, as shown here. That car, P1075, actually won again in 1969, becoming the only car in the world to win Le Mans 2 years in a row. The car behind me was built by Superformance. This is not a kit car or a replica, it's an actual GT40 continuation car with a real GT40 P chassis number, as well as being listed in the GT40 registry. It's built exactly to the standards of the original and features a steel monocoque and steel pressed roof, just like the original. In fact, 2/3 of the parts on the rolling chassis are interchangeable with an original car. The car is jaw-dropping to look at. The lines are mesmerizing, the stance is incredible. You don't even have to drive the car to put a smile on your face. As I've had this car at my house for the last couple days, I couldn't stop but spend way too much time just staring at it. But given the fact that I'm a gearhead, yeah, I'd like to go for a drive. This specific car was built to commemorate the legendary 1969 Le Mans winning car. It's powered by a 364 cubic inch V8 that makes over 500 horsepower. And to make sure it's period correct, it's topped with 4 beautiful Weber carburetors. And considering the fact that its curb weight is only 2,400 pounds, it is crazy fast. And these black headers and megaphone exhaust make some of the best noises I've ever heard. It's amazing how small the GT40 is when standing next to it. The roofline barely comes up to my hip level. Something that's not small, however, are the enormous 15-inch wide Avon hand groove tires that poke out of the bulging fender flares like nobody's business. These are the widest tires of any car I have ever driven. Opening the door reveals incredibly wide sills that make hopping into the GT40 a game in itself. However, fortunately, they have made the steering wheel removable to make getting in and out a lot easier. Once on the inside of the GT40, the interior is mesmerizing. You feel like you're transported back into the 1960s. These gorgeous seats with little ventilation holes, as well as the 5-point harness, all of the analog gauges. The cool thing is we actually have air conditioning, working turn signals, and on the other car that I'm gonna drive later, a working front lift. But enough standing around. Let's take it for a spin. Now that I'm all belted up, let's go ahead and fire up that good old-fashioned V8. So to turn on the GT40, turn the key to the right. And then it's actually got a push-button start, funny enough. Make sure it's not in gear. And here we go. The second that massive V8 fires up, you know you're in for an unforgettable experience. The entire cabin vibrates and gasoline fumes spill throughout the cabin. I personally love the smell of gasoline, especially with older engines, but it makes you feel like you're transported back into the 1960s at the staging grid, ready for a 24-hour of Le Mans race. All right, let's take it for a spin. Listen to that! Listen to that! To say I've never driven anything like this would be an understatement. It's absolutely absurd. The levels of noises from that megaphone exhaust and the fact that that massive V8 is literally right behind my head. I love the fact that when you peer into the rear view mirror, you see those 4 Weber carburetors poking up. Oh my God. Visibility is actually pretty impressive. It kind of looks like you're looking out of a racing helmet. You've got this wide but narrow windshield, but the hood slopes down really quickly. It almost reminds me of the driving position of a McLaren, funny enough. Obviously, this doesn't feel anywhere near the same as a McLaren to drive, but in terms of your visibility, the front, rear, side visibility is fantastic. The steering, no power-assisted steering, is very, very heavy, as is the amount of pressure required to push down the throttle and the gas and the clutch, but that adds to the experience. I like it. Oh my gosh. It is certainly quick and just so visceral. It feels like you're inside the engine bay, which I practically am. Steering feel is phenomenal. You feel all the bumps in the road. Those massive sticky 40 tread wear tires are picking up every single rock and bouncing it against the chassis. You just hear every single noise. It's something that you don't get in modern day cars and makes driving this feel so much more lively. Every single person you pass in the GT40, especially in this Golf livery, smiles, puts their thumbs up. It makes their day. It is just an absolute sight to see. It does take a lot of effort to drive. This is not something you just hop in, pay no attention, and cruise down the road. It takes a decent amount of muscle to turn the steering wheel as well as the pedals. You got to pay attention. With no power brakes or any of the safety systems that you're used to on modern cars, you can get into trouble a lot easier, despite the fact that we have some of the widest tires I've ever seen on a car. But there's nothing like driving this. The smell of gas, the ability to see the Golf livery peering out over the hood. Wow. The GT40 rides unbelievably low to the ground. It's like a go-kart, only way more visceral and savage. It is such a unique driving experience, and the noise is just out of this world. Now, despite the fact that it's a pretty small car on the outside, it's actually pretty spacious in here. Part of that is due to the really wide sills that actually act as excellent armrests when you get tired. Decent amount of headroom as well. I'm pretty surprised about that. But like with all Superformance cars, one of my favorite parts is you can actually drive this all the time without being worried. This specific car is actually available for sale for just under $210,000, whereas an original 1960s GT40 will cost you $3 million, $4 million, sometimes upwards of $10 million. That's a lot scarier to drive. Now, while this one is a handful to drive, to say the least, but I actually quite enjoy that about it, Superformance can make the powertrain pretty much in any way you want it to be. And I've got another GT40 with me that is a totally different driving experience. Let's go check that thing out. Now it's time to show you something a little bit different. The beauty of Superformance cars is how customizable they truly are. You can choose between a Mark 1 or a Mark 2 GT40, a GT40R, or something that they've dubbed the Future 40. You can have whatever color scheme you want, even different drivetrains, powertrains, and even different widths of the body itself. This car is known as the Future 40. It was built to commemorate both the 1968 and 1969 winner, and at the same time, Ford's recent victory at Le Mans with the 2016 car. The livery is straight from the new Ford GT Le Mans car, and it's got modern aerodynamic tweaks like this massive removable carbon fiber front splitter, the carbon fiber canards, and that enormous carbon fiber rear wing. This Future 40 even has HRE wheels mated to Michelin Pilot Sport Cup 2 tires for extra grip. They measure 345s in the back, but the crazy part is the Gulf livery car has even wider tires than that. But the huge difference between these two cars is the powertrain, and the different powertrain results in a vehicle that drives entirely different than the other one. And I kind of like that. So under the hood of the Future 40 is a Coyote V8 from the new modern Mustang with a massive Roush supercharger. On low boost, it makes 650 horsepower, but can be cranked up all the way to 800. With 800 horsepower and a curb weight of 2,400 pounds, its power to weight ratio of 666 horsepower per ton is almost the same as the Bugatti Chiron. Think about that for a second. Now let's see what this one is like to drive. Oh wait, this one's right-hand drive. The driving experience between the two cars is a night and day difference. The GT40 I just hopped out of feels like a car from the 1960s. It's actually a vehicle that you can do vintage racing in. The clutch is more difficult, the engine wants to die if you don't keep the revs up, and it just takes more effort behind the wheel to drive the car. The Future 40, on the other hand, is a lot easier to drive. The best way to explain it, in my opinion, for any of you guys who have driven a 2005-2006 Ford GT, is it actually feels very similar to driving one of those, only a little bit more raw and connected, and a little bit crazier. It actually reminds me of the mid-2000s Ford GT in many ways. We've got a big supercharger mounted behind my head, just like in the 05-06 car. It sounds pretty similar too. This thing makes some unbelievably good noises. The pops! Oh yeah! Wow! You gotta be hard on the brakes. There's no power assisted brakes or steering like in the other car. But man, this thing is definitely easier to to go quickly through the canyons. We've got Bilstein coilovers at all four corners. We've got Willwood 6-piston caliper, brakes at the front, and with a curb weight of only 2,400 pounds, it's unbelievably nimble, playful in the corners. But yes, at full boost, which this car is not at right now, 800 horsepower, you gotta be careful. Rear-wheel drive, no traction control. I don't care how much meat you've got in the back, that takes a serious driver. Super Performance, if you got another one with that much power, I'm down. Oh, this thing is a riot. Now for the astute observer, or well, really anyone who isn't blind, you'll notice that I am on the right side of the car. That's because Super Performance offers GT40s as both left-hand drive and right-hand drive. Now the unique part about this car is that instead of the shifter being mounted in the center, it's got a ZF 5-speed manual transmission. It's actually over on the right of me, which I'm quite thankful for because while I've driven a fair amount of right-hand drive cars, they've all been newer cars and they've all been automatic. I haven't yet had the experience of rowing gears with my left hand, but this is a shifter located kind of almost in the really wide door sill right by my right leg, and I actually quite like the positioning of it. The linkage is nice and snug and secure. Clutch feels excellent in this car. I love the sounds this makes. It's actually ridiculous. Oh, I hope the sound comes across on camera because this sounds unbelievable. I've actually got LED indicators on the tachometer to let you know when to shift. That's pretty cool. Holy moly. I'm impressed. This thing is a blast to drive. Two totally different cars. This Future 40 is actually for sale right now for $250,000. I'm having trouble figuring out which one I prefer. I think if I wanted to just take out a car once a week or once every 2 weeks, I'd go for the more period correct 1969 Golf GT40 Mark I. If I wanted something to drive much more often, I think I'd opt for the Future 40. So I'm pulling off into a pullout right now, and I've actually got a button in the center of the dash to raise up the front of the car like you're used to having on modern day exotics, not 1960s race cars. But it's a really nice feature because with that carbon fiber front splitter, this is very, very low to the ground. What is not to love about the GT40? Stunning looks, incredible power, unbelievable history. This might be the most legendary race car of all time, the GT40, especially chassis P1075. Man, I haven't driven too many cars without power brakes. It definitely takes some getting used to. Woo! Well guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like always, please browse the channel and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you next one.